in the highest peaks of the Shadowmount Range, where the air was thin and the old magic ran strong through veins of silver and starlight, the wolf packs gathered for the most sacred of ceremonies. The full bonding was held only once each generation, when the moon reached its greatest power and the barriers between the physical and spiritual worlds grew gossamer thin. Lin stood among the assembled Omegas, his heart racing with anticipation and barely contained hope. At 19, he was considered old for an unbonded Omega, his unusual gifts having kept him separate from the typical mating rituals that governed pack life. But those same gifts, the ability to weave magic through song, to heal through melody, to touch souls with nothing more than his voice, had marked him as special, destined for something greater than ordinary pack bonds. The ceremony ground was ancient beyond memory, a circle of standing stones that hummed with accumulated power from centuries of such gatherings. Bonfires blazed at the cardinal points, their flames dancing higher than seemed possible in the mountain wind. Representatives from all the major packs of the region had come to witness this sacred event, to see which young wolves would be blessed with fated bonds and which would return home to wait for another season. Lin wore the traditional robes of an unmated Omega, pure white silk that caught the firelight and seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. His hair, an unusual shade of silver gold that marked his magical heritage, was braided with small bells that chimed softly with each movement. Around his throat hung the collar of fate, a delicate chain of silver and moonstone that would warm and brighten when his destined mate drew near. As the ceremony began with the ancient chants of the pack shamans, Lin felt the familiar stirring in his chest that meant his magic was responding to the spiritual currents flowing through the sacred space. His voice, trained from childhood in the old songs, rose and fell with the ritual words, adding harmonies that made even the eldest shamans nod in approval. But it was when the fated bonds began to manifest that Lin's world narrowed to a single point of burning awareness. Across the circle, standing tall and proud among the assembled alphas, was Ray Stoneclaw, heir to the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. The moment their eyes met, Lin felt the silver chain around his throat grow warm, then hot, then blazing with inner light that announced to everyone present that destiny had spoken. Ray was everything an alpha should be and more, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of commanding presence that made others instinctively step back and show respect. His dark hair was shot through with premature silver that spoke of early exposure to powerful magic, and his storm-gray eyes held depths that suggested both intelligence and ruthless determination. He was known throughout the territories as a brilliant strategist, a fierce warrior, and a leader who would stop at nothing to protect and advance his pack's interests. The bond between them manifested as a silver thread of light that stretched across the sacred circle, pulsing with power that made the assembled wolves gasp in amazement. This was clearly a strong connection, the kind that occurred perhaps once in a generation, promising great things for both their peoples. Lin stepped forward, following the pull of destiny toward the alpha who was meant to complete him. His heart soared with joy and anticipation as he approached Ray, seeing in those storm-gray eyes what he took for recognition and acceptance of their fated connection. But instead of the warmth and welcome he expected, Lin found only cold calculation and barely concealed distaste. Ray's expression was that of someone examining a disappointing purchase, finding it lacking in every important quality. "No," Ray said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent circle. "I will not choose an Omega who sings instead of fights. My fate is not to be weak." The words hit Lin like physical blows, each one more devastating than the last. Around them, the assembled packs watched in shocked silence as one of their most promising young alphas prepared to do the unthinkable, reject his fated mate in front of everyone who mattered in their world. "But we're bonded," Lin whispered, his voice barely audible above the crackling of the ceremonial fires. "The moon goddess herself has chosen us for each other. You can feel it too. I know you can." "I feel a mistake," Ray replied coldly, reaching out to grasp the silver thread that connected them. "A cosmic error that I refuse to be bound by. Look at you, delicate, soft, more suited to singing lullabies than standing beside a true alpha in battle." With deliberate cruelty, Ray began to tear their bond apart with his bare hands. The magical connection, which should have been unbreakable once formed, writhed and sparked as he forced it to separate. Lin felt each tear like a knife in his soul, the pain so intense that he fell to his knees in the dirt. But Ray wasn't finished with his public humiliation. As he cast the broken pieces of their bond into the ceremonial fire, he continued his devastating assessment of Lin's worthiness. "You are corrupted," he declared loud enough for every ear present to hear. "Unsuitable for any alpha with ambition and pride. I need a mate who can match my strength, not one who will always be a burden and a weakness." The physical pain of the severed bond was nothing compared to the spiritual agony that followed. As their connection was destroyed, Lin felt something fundamental break inside him, as if half his soul had been ripped away and burned. Blood began to flow from his ears as his magically enhanced hearing, tied to his emotional state, overloaded and began to shut down. The assembled wolves watched in fascination and horror as their gifted young singer writhed on the ground, his white robes staining with blood and dirt. Some looked disturbed by the brutality of what they were witnessing, but many more seemed entertained by the spectacle of an Omega being put in his place so dramatically. "Corrupted," one of the pack elders said, breaking the stunned silence that followed Rhea's rejection. "Clearly unsuitable if his own fated mate finds him so lacking. The boy must be removed before his presence contaminates others." "Agreed," another elder nodded. "An Omega who cannot even maintain his bond is a danger to pack stability. He must be exiled immediately." The verdict was swift and merciless. Lin, still reeling from the trauma of his severed bond, was dragged before the assembled pack leaders and formally cast out from werewolf society. His family name was stripped from him, his pack status revoked, and his right to sanctuary among any civilized werewolf community permanently removed. "You have until dawn to leave our territories," the chief elder pronounced. "Take nothing but what you can carry, and never return. You are no longer one of us." His parents, when they came to say goodbye, could barely meet his eyes. His father, a respected pack warrior, stood stiffly apart while his mother wept silently into her hands. "We cannot help you," his father said quietly, his voice thick with shame and grief. "To do so would risk our own standing in the pack. You understand, don't you?" Lin did understand, which somehow made the abandonment even more painful. They were choosing their social survival over their son's welfare, a rational decision that nevertheless left him feeling utterly alone in the world. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose, Lin shouldered his small pack of possessions and walked away from the only life he had ever known. Behind him, the ceremonial fires still smoldered, but their light no longer held any warmth for him. Ahead lay the eastern border, a region of wild magic and dangerous creatures that existed beyond the boundaries of civilized werewolf territory. It was a place where exiles went to die, where the normal rules of society held no power, where survival depended on strength and cunning that Lin wasn't sure he possessed. The journey to the border took 3 days on foot, 3 days during which Lin's condition continued to deteriorate. The trauma of his severed bond had left him unable to access his werewolf form, trapped in human shape in a wilderness where such vulnerability was often fatal. His magical abilities, once as natural as breathing, now caused him excruciating pain whenever he tried to use them. By the time he crossed into the Misty Lands, the wild region that lay beyond werewolf control, he was barely conscious from exhaustion and blood loss. The magical barriers that separated the civilized territories from the untamed wilderness felt like walking through molten metal, leaving him gasping and disoriented on the far side. The Misty Land earned their name from the perpetual fog that shrouded them, a combination of natural weather patterns and magical emanations that made navigation nearly impossible for those unfamiliar with the region. Strange creatures moved through the mist, things that had once been natural animals but had been changed by exposure to raw magic over generations. For days, Lin wandered through this hostile landscape, surviving on whatever edible plants he could find and water from streams that tasted of copper and starlight. His human form was poorly suited to the demands of wilderness survival, and he found himself growing weaker with each passing hour. It was during his darkest moment, when he had collapsed beside a twisted oak tree and was preparing to simply wait for death to claim him, that salvation arrived in an unexpected form. Through the swirling mist came the sound of voices, rough and crude, speaking in the common tongue used by traders and mercenaries. "Well, well, what have we here?" one of them said as they emerged from the fog. "A pretty little wolf, all alone and helpless." There were 4 of them, human by the look of it, armed with weapons and wearing the kind of practical gear that marked them as professionals in violence. Slavers, Lin realized with growing horror, the kind of people who made their living capturing supernatural beings for the illegal markets that thrived in the border regions. "This one's in rough shape," another observed, poking Lin with the toe of his boot. "But he's young and pretty enough. Might fetch a decent price if we clean him up." "Omega werewolf by the scent of him," the leader said, crouching down to examine Lin more closely. "Recent rejection, I'd guess, which makes him extra valuable to certain buyers. Nothing like a broken Omega to appeal to collectors with specific tastes." They bound him with chains designed to suppress supernatural abilities and loaded him into a wagon with other captured beings. Lin was too weak to resist, barely conscious as they began the journey toward whatever market they intended to sell him in. But they never reached their destination. The attack came at sunset, just as they were making camp for the night. One moment the slavers were dividing up their rations and discussing the potential profits from their cargo. The next they were screaming in terror as something emerged from the mist around them. Lin, chained in the wagon with the other prisoners, could only catch glimpses of their rescuer through the chaos. Tall and elegant, moving with inhuman speed and grace, cutting through the slavers' defenses as if they were made of paper. When the last of them fell, the figure approached the wagon and Lin got his first clear look at their savior. He was tall and pale, with aristocratic features that spoke of ancient bloodlines and refined breeding. His dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and his clothes, while practical for travel, were clearly expensive and well-made. But it was his eyes that marked him as something other than human, deep red, like fresh blood, with an intelligence that suggested centuries of accumulated experience. This was a vampire, and not just any vampire. The power radiating from him was immense, marking him as one of the old bloodlines that had ruled the night for millennia. "Slavers," the vampire said with disgust, surveying the bodies scattered around their camp. "I despise creatures who profit from others' suffering." He approached the wagon and began examining the chained prisoners with the careful attention of someone accustomed to making quick decisions in dangerous situations. When his red eyes fell on Lin, something shifted in his expression, a flicker of what might have been surprise or recognition. "You," he said, stepping closer to get a better look. "You're the one they were so excited about. The broken Omega with unusual magical resonance." "Please," Lin whispered, his voice barely audible after days without proper food or water. "Just let me die. I'm not worth the trouble." "Worth is not for others to determine," the vampire replied, producing a key to the slaver's chains with practiced efficiency. "I am Kassian, and you are now under my protection." "Why?" Lin asked as the chains fell away from his wrists, leaving angry red marks where they had burned his skin. "Because I find myself in need of assistance," Kassian said carefully, "and because leaving you here would be wasteful. You will come with me to my home, where we can discuss the terms of your continued existence." The journey to Kassian's domain was accomplished through magical means that bypassed the normal limitations of geography. They stepped through a portal that opened in the side of an ancient oak tree, emerging moments later in a completely different landscape. Kassian's home was a castle that seemed to have been carved from a single piece of black stone, its towers reaching toward a sky that was permanently shrouded in twilight. The structure radiated age and power, clearly the work of master builders who had understood both architecture and magic. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow," Kassian said as they approached the imposing main entrance. "Your new home, for the foreseeable future. What do you want from me?" Lin asked, still too weak to fully process the implications of his situation. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure yet," Kassian admitted. "But you have interesting qualities. Magical resonance that I haven't encountered before. We'll figure out how best to utilize those qualities once you've recovered your strength." The interior of the castle was both magnificent and austere, with high vaulted ceilings and walls lined with tapestries that depicted scenes from ages past. The furnishings were elegant but sparse, suggesting that the castle's owner valued quality over quantity. Lin's quarters were in one of the lower towers, a suite of rooms that included a bedroom, a small sitting area, and a window that looked out over gardens that bloomed despite the perpetual twilight. The accommodations were far better than anything he could have hoped for as an exile, but they also felt like a very comfortable prison. Your duties will be simple to begin with, Kassian explained as he showed Lin around his new quarters. Basic household tasks, assistance with my research, organization of my library. Nothing too demanding while you recover from your recent trauma. And if I refuse, then you'll be returned to where I found you, Kassian said with a slight smile that showed the tips of his fangs. But I don't think you'll refuse. You're too intelligent to choose death over opportunity. The first few weeks at Raven's Hollow were a period of cautious adjustment for both of them. Lin performed his assigned duties with quiet efficiency, keeping to himself and speaking only when directly addressed. Kassian maintained a careful distance, observing his new charge with the patient attention of someone who had learned not to rush important decisions. But it was impossible for them to exist in the same space without beginning to notice things about each other. Lin observed that Kassian was unfailingly polite, never raising his voice or showing impatience even when correcting mistakes. The vampire clearly valued knowledge above almost everything else, spending most of his time in the castle's extensive library or working in his private study. For his part, Kassian began to notice that Lin possessed qualities that went far beyond simple magical resonance. The Omega had an intuitive understanding of organization and efficiency that made household tasks run more smoothly than they had in decades. More intriguingly, Lin showed signs of magical abilities that had nothing to do with typical werewolf gifts. It was during one of their rare conversations that Kassian made a discovery that would change both their lives. You were trained in the old songs, Kassian observed one evening as they shared a meal in the castle's great hall. I can hear it in the way you speak, the unconscious rhythm in your voice. All Omegas learn some traditional music, Lin replied carefully. It's considered part of our basic education. No, this is different, Kassian insisted. You have formal training in magic song, the kind that takes years to master and requires significant natural talent to begin with. Where did you study? Lin hesitated, uncomfortable with discussing his past. My pack had an elder who recognized my abilities when I was young. He taught me what he could before he died. Show me, Kassian said suddenly. Sing something. Anything. I can't, Lin said quickly, panic flashing across his features. Not since the bond was severed. It hurts too much now. Magic that causes pain is magic that needs healing, Kassian said gently. Perhaps with time and proper guidance, you could learn to use your gifts again without suffering. The idea that his abilities might be recoverable had never occurred to Lin. Since his rejection, he had assumed that the damage to his magical nature was permanent, that he would spend the rest of his life cut off from the songs that had once been as natural as breathing. But Kassian's words planted a seed of hope that began to grow in the weeks that followed. The vampire proved to be surprisingly knowledgeable about magical healing, offering suggestions and exercises that gradually began to ease the pain associated with Lin's abilities. Their relationship began to shift from master and servant to something more like teacher and student. Kassian showed genuine interest in Lin's progress, offering encouragement and guidance without pushing too hard or too fast. For the first time since his exile, Lin began to feel like someone valued him for his potential rather than simply tolerating his presence. It was during their third month together that they encountered the child who would change both their lives forever. Lin had been sent to the nearby village to purchase supplies when he heard crying coming from an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Following the sound, he found a small boy, perhaps 6 years old, huddled in a corner and clearly in distress. The child was obviously supernatural, with features that spoke of mixed heritage and an aura of magical potential that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. He was also clearly malnourished and frightened, flinching away when Lin approached him. Hey there, Lin said softly, crouching down to the child's level. What's your name? Where are your parents? The boy looked up at him with eyes that held far too much pain for someone so young. When he opened his mouth to speak, no sound emerged, but Lin could sense the magical potential locked away inside him. "You can't speak," Lin asked gently. The boy shook his head, but something in his expression suggested that his silence was not a physical limitation but something else entirely. Over the following hour, Lin managed to piece together the child's story through gestures and empathic connection. His name was Mika, and he was the product of a union between a human magic user and a creature from the fairy realms. His mixed heritage made him an outcast in both communities, too human for the Fae courts and too magical for human society. His parents had died when he was very young, and he had been passed from one reluctant caregiver to another until finally being abandoned in the village where Lin found him. The trauma of repeated rejection had caused him to retreat into himself, locking away his voice along with his magical abilities. "Come with me," Lin said impulsively, extending his hand to the frightened child. "I know someone who might be able to help you." Bringing Mika back to Raven's Hollow was a risk that Lin hadn't fully considered until he was standing in the castle's great hall with a magical child hiding behind his legs while Kassian studied them both with an unreadable expression. "And what exactly do you propose to do with him?" Kassian asked, his tone neutral but not unkind. "He needs help," Lin said, his voice growing stronger as his protective instincts engaged. "He's like me, broken, abandoned but still capable of magic. I can't just leave him to die alone. He would be better served by an institution designed for magical children," Kassian pointed out practically. "There are several such facilities that could provide proper care and education." "He doesn't need an institution," Lin replied with surprising firmness. "He needs a family, people who won't abandon him when caring for him becomes inconvenient." Something in Lin's tone made Kassian look at him more closely, seeing for the first time the fierce protectiveness that had awakened in the Omega's eyes. This was not the broken, submissive creature who had arrived at his castle months earlier, but someone who had found something worth fighting for. "Very well," Kassian said after a long moment of consideration. "He may stay, but you will be responsible for his care and education. I will not tolerate any disruption to the household routine." "Thank you," Lin said, the relief in his voice unmistakable. "I promise you won't regret this decision." "I hope not," Kassian replied, but there was something almost warm in his expression as he watched Lin kneel down to comfort the frightened child. The addition of Mika to their household created changes that none of them had anticipated. The boy was intelligent and eager to please, but his trauma ran deep and manifested in nightmares, episodes of panic, and a stubborn refusal to use his voice for any purpose. Lin threw himself into caring for the child with a dedication that surprised even him. He researched magical healing techniques for trauma, learned about mixed heritage physiology, and spent hours each day working patiently with Mika to help him process his experiences and begin to heal. Kassian watched this transformation with growing fascination. The broken Omega who had been brought to his castle was revealing qualities of strength, compassion, and determination that had been hidden beneath layers of rejection and trauma. More importantly, Lin's nurturing relationship with Mika seemed to be healing his own wounds in ways that simple time and rest had not accomplished. "You're good with him?" Kassian observed one evening as they watched Mika playing quietly in the castle's library. "He makes it easy," Lin replied. "He reminds me of myself at that age, before I learned to be afraid of disappointing people." "And now? Are you still afraid of disappointment?" Lin considered the question carefully, watching as Mika built an elaborate castle out of books, his young face serious with concentration. "Not the way I used to be," he said finally. "I've learned that the people worth caring about don't abandon you for being imperfect." "Is that what you think I am? Someone worth caring about?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither had been willing to acknowledge until this moment. Lin felt his heart begin to race as he recognized the significance of what Kassian was asking. "Yes," he said quietly, meeting the vampire's red eyes directly. "I think you're someone worth caring about very much. Even though I'm a predator? Even though I purchased you from slavers and brought you here against your will. You saved me from slavers," Lin corrected. And you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, the chance to be useful, to care for someone who needs me, to have a purpose beyond simply surviving. And what if I told you that I've grown to care for you as well, not as a servant or a convenient source of magical assistance, but as someone whose company I genuinely value? Then I'd say that we've both found something unexpected, Lin replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Something worth protecting. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. The careful distance that Kassian had maintained began to soften into something warmer and more personal. Their conversations grew longer and more intimate, ranging across subjects from philosophy to magical theory to their hopes for Mika's future. But it was the small gestures that meant the most. The way Kassian would bring Lin tea during his late-night sessions helping Mika with his studies. The way Lin would leave small magical protections around the castle to ensure Kassian's safety during his daylight rest. The gradual evolution from formal politeness to genuine affection. I've never had anything like this before, Lin confessed one evening as they sat together in Kassian's private study, sharing wine and comfortable silence. A relationship built on choice rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than biological imperative. Nor have I, Kassian admitted. Vampires are not known for their capacity for emotional connection. We tend to view others as either food sources or potential threats. But you've shown me possibilities I never considered. What kind of possibilities? The possibility that immortality might be less lonely with the right companion, Kassian said, his ancient eyes soft with an emotion that had nothing to do with predatory hunger. The possibility that strength can come from protecting rather than dominating. The possibility that love might be worth the vulnerability it requires. Love, Lin repeated, his heart skipping at the word he had been afraid to say himself. Is that so surprising? You've transformed my empty castle into a home, my solitary existence into something resembling a family. How could I not love the person responsible for such a miracle? I love you too, Lin whispered, the confession feeling both terrifying and liberating. I love your patience, your kindness, your willingness to see value in broken things. I love the way you've helped me heal without trying to change who I am. Their first kiss was gentle and tentative, a careful exploration of new possibilities rather than a claiming or conquest. When they parted, both were smiling with the quiet joy of those who have found something precious and unexpected. No regrets, Kassian asked, echoing a question that would become their private ritual. None, Lin replied with conviction. Only gratitude that I was broken in exactly the right way to end up here with you. And Mika? Kassian asked, glancing toward the library where the boy was still playing. How do we explain this development to him? We tell him the truth, Lin said simply. That families come in all shapes and sizes, and that love is what makes a house into a home. Their quiet happiness was disrupted 6 months later when reports began reaching them of military activity in the werewolf territories. Scouts had been seen moving through the misty lands, and there were rumors of pack warriors massing near the border. The truth came in the form of a formal delegation that arrived at Raven's Hollow under a flag of truce, demanding an audience with the castle's master. Kassian received them in his great hall, with Lin standing beside him in a gesture of solidarity that was not lost on the assembled werewolves. At the head of the delegation stood Ray Stoneclaw, now bearing the full authority of an established alpha. He looked older than his years, his face bearing lines of stress and exhaustion that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. Lord Dreywald, Ray said formally, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Kassian with barely concealed hostility. I come seeking the return of property that belongs to my people. I am not aware of possessing any property belonging to werewolves, Kassian replied with deceptive mildness. Perhaps you could be more specific about what you believe I have taken. The Omega, Ray said, his gaze shifting to Lin with an expression that mixed possessiveness with something that might have been regret. He belongs to us, to our pack, to our bloodline. His exile was premature. We have come to correct that error. How interesting, Kassian said, his tone growing cooler. And what makes you think this Omega wishes to return to people who cast him out so enthusiastically? He is pack, Ray replied as if that explained everything. Pack bonds supersede individual preferences. An alpha has the right to reclaim any omega of his bloodline, regardless of circumstances. Pack bonds that you yourself severed, Lin said quietly, speaking for the first time since the delegation's arrival. Pack membership that you yourself revoked. You can't cast someone out and then claim ownership of them when it becomes convenient. Ray stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. The broken, bleeding Omega who had collapsed at the rejection ceremony was gone, replaced by someone who radiated confidence and strength. What have they done to you? Ray asked, something that might have been wonder creeping into his voice. They've given me something you never could, Lin replied calmly. Respect, patience, and the freedom to become who I was meant to be. They've helped me heal from the wounds you inflicted and discover strength I never knew I possessed. You belong with your own kind, Ray insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. With werewolves, with your pack, with me. I belong with those who value me, Lin corrected firmly. Those who see my worth rather than my weaknesses. Those who offer partnership rather than ownership. I made a mistake, Ray admitted suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even him. I see that now. The bond between us, I can still feel it sometimes like a phantom limb. It's been driving me mad. This constant ache where our connection should be. You made a choice, Lin said without anger. Just as I'm making one now. The difference is that I'm choosing love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, hope over despair. The vampire has corrupted you, one of Rhea's companions snarled. Used his dark magic to cloud your judgment and steal your loyalty. No magic, Lin said, reaching out to take Kassian's hand in a gesture that spoke volumes about the nature of their relationship. Just patience, respect, and genuine affection. Concepts that seem to be foreign to your way of thinking. This is unnatural, another pack member protested. An Omega bonded to a vampire, raising some half-breed foundling. It goes against everything our people believe about proper order and natural law. Your people, Lin said with emphasis on the first word, cast me out for being inconvenient. You lost any right to dictate my choices when you branded me as unfit and sent me into exile to die. We can offer you redemption, Ray said desperately. A chance to come home, to reclaim your place in our society. The pack has voted to rescind your exile, to welcome you back with full honors. And all I have to do is abandon the family I've built, the man I love, and the child who depends on me? Lin asked. Forgive me if I don't find that offer particularly tempting. Choose carefully, Omega, the pack's war leader said with menace creeping into his voice. We outnumber your protector significantly. It would be unfortunate if this disagreement led to unnecessary violence. Is that a threat? Kassian asked, his voice carrying undertones of power that made the temperature in the great hall drop noticeably. It's a statement of fact, the war leader replied. We have 50 warriors surrounding this castle. Surrender the Omega willingly, and we'll leave in peace. Refuse, and we'll take him by force. You're welcome to try, Kassian said with a smile that displayed his fangs prominently. But I should warn you that I've been looking forward to a good fight. It's been decades since anyone was foolish enough to threaten my home. There will be no fighting, Lin said firmly, stepping between the two groups before the confrontation could escalate further. Not over me, not in my name. I have something to say, and you're all going to listen. He moved to the center of the great hall, positioning himself where everyone present could see and hear him clearly. When he began to speak, his voice carried the trained projection of someone educated in the bardic arts. My name is Lin, he said, his words ringing with authority that surprised everyone present, including himself. I was born under the full moon to parents who loved me, raised by a pack that valued my gifts, and trained in magic that connected me to powers older than your bloodlines. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. I was also rejected by my fated mate, exiled from my community, and left to die in the wilderness. Not because I was weak or worthless, but because I didn't fit into someone else's narrow definition of what an omega should be. You don't understand, Ray said desperately. I was young, foolish, too concerned with what others would think. If I could take it back, if I could undo the pain I caused you. But you can't, Lynn said gently but firmly. The past is fixed, Ray. We can learn from it, grow beyond it, but we can't change it. And I wouldn't want to, even if I could. How can you say that? Ray asked, genuine anguish in his voice. How can you not want to undo the worst moment of both our lives? Because that moment led me here, Lynn replied, gesturing to encompass Kassian and the castle around them. To a man who saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself, to a child who needed someone to understand his pain, to a family built on choice rather than obligation. He turned to address the assembled pack warriors directly. You came here to retrieve property that you believe belongs to you. But I am not property. I am not a resource to be claimed or reclaimed when convenient. I am a person, with the right to choose my own path, my own family, my own future. And what do you choose? Ray asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. I choose the man who helped me heal when I was broken. I choose the child who reminds me every day that love is stronger than fear. I choose the family that we've built together, imperfect and unconventional as it may be. Lynn paused, gathering his courage for what he knew would be his final words to his former pack. I forgive you, Ray. I forgive all of you for the pain you caused, the rejection you inflicted, the exile you imposed. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean returning to a situation that was never healthy for anyone involved. So that's it, Ray asked, his voice breaking slightly. You're just going to stay here with your vampire and pretend that everything that came before meant nothing? Nothing that came before was meaningless, Lynn corrected. It all led me to where I am now, to who I am now. I'm grateful for the journey, even the painful parts. But I'm not going back. The pack delegation left Raven's Hollow without achieving their objective, their threats of violence proving empty in the face of Lynn's quiet dignity and Kassian's obvious willingness to defend his family. Ray was the last to leave, standing for a long moment in the castle's courtyard and staring up at the tower windows where Lynn and Mika could be seen reading together. He's happy, Kassian observed, joining Ray in the courtyard. Happier than I've ever seen him. Isn't that what you should want for someone you claim to love? I know, Ray said quietly. I can see it in his face, in the way he carries himself. He's become everything I was too blind to recognize when I had the chance. Then let him go, Kassian said with surprising gentleness. Let him be happy with the family he's chosen. That's the only gift you can give him now that has any meaning. Will you take care of him? Ray asked, the question seeming to cost him significant effort. With my life, Kassian replied without hesitation. He is precious to me in ways you might not understand, but I suspect you can recognize. And the child is ours now in every way that matters. He'll grow up knowing he's loved and valued, that his differences make him special rather than wrong. Good, Ray said, and seemed to mean it. That's good. After the pack delegation departed, life at Raven's Hollow settled into a new pattern of happiness and contentment. Lynn's magical abilities, freed from the trauma of rejection and nurtured by Kassian's patient guidance, grew stronger than they had ever been. His voice, once again capable of weaving spells through song, became a source of healing and protection for their growing household. For Mika began to speak again, his voice emerging gradually as his trust in his new family deepened. The first words he spoke were Papa Lynn and Papa Kassian, delivered with a shy smile that brought tears to both men's eyes. We should make it official, Lynn said one evening as they watched Mika practicing his letters in the castle's study. The adoption, he should have legal protection, a name that belongs to him, papers that prove he has a family. Agreed, Kassian said immediately. What name should he take? Drewald? Something of your choosing. What about a new name entirely? Lynn suggested. Something that belongs to all of us, that represents the family we've chosen to become. They settled on the name Ravensong, honoring both Kassian's castle and Lin's musical gifts. Mika Ravensong had a pleasing sound to it, and the boy's face lit up with joy when they told him about his new identity. "I have a real name now?" he asked, the wonder in his voice making both men smile. "A name that means I belong somewhere?" "You have always belonged here," Lin assured him, pulling the child into a warm embrace. "Now you just have paperwork to prove it." As word of their unusual family spread through the supernatural communities, they began to receive visitors from others seeking sanctuary or guidance. Rejected Omegas who had heard of Lin's transformation and hoped for similar healing. Mixed heritage children who needed homes where their differences would be celebrated rather than hidden. Vampires who had grown tired of their solitary existence and wanted to learn about building connections. Rather than turning these supplicants away, Lin and Kassian made the decision to expand their household into something more like a formal sanctuary. They established the House of Peace, a refuge for those who had been cast out from their birth communities and needed time to heal and discover new purposes. "Are you sure about this?" Kassian asked as they watched construction crews working to add new wings to the castle. "It's a significant commitment, opening our home to strangers on a permanent basis." "I'm sure," Lin replied without hesitation. "We have something precious here, something that shouldn't be hoarded. If we can help others find what we've found, then we become something larger than ourselves," Kassian agreed. "A family that grows through choice rather than blood, through love rather than obligation." The House of Peace officially opened its doors 6 months after Rhea's failed attempt to reclaim Lin. Their first residents included a young vampire who had been cast out for refusing to participate in his clan's more violent traditions, a werewolf Omega who had been rejected for bonding with a human, and a trio of Fey children whose mixed heritage made them unwelcome in either the summer or winter courts. Lin found his calling as both the house's administrator and its primary counselor for those dealing with rejection trauma. His own experiences gave him unique insights into the healing process, and his recovered magical abilities allowed him to provide comfort and support in ways that conventional therapy could not match. Kassian, meanwhile, used his centuries of accumulated wealth and influence to protect their residents from those who might seek to harm or reclaim them. The Dreywald name carried significant weight in vampire circles, and few were willing to risk his displeasure by threatening those under his protection. But it was their work with the children that brought them the greatest satisfaction. Mika had grown into a confident, articulate boy whose mixed heritage allowed him to serve as a bridge between different magical communities. He helped newcomers adjust to life at the house, showing them that being different wasn't a flaw to be hidden, but a strength to be celebrated. "You've created something remarkable here," observed one of their visitors, a traveling diplomat from the Fey courts who had come to assess the house's work. "A place where being an outcast becomes a qualification rather than a disqualification." "We've simply provided space for remarkable people to flourish," Lin replied modestly. "The strength was always there, it just needed the right environment to grow. And the right family to nurture it," the diplomat added, watching as Kassian helped a young vampire learn to control his bloodlust through meditation rather than violence. "You've proven that love truly can transcend any boundary." 5 years after its founding, the House of Peace had become a recognized institution in the supernatural world, known for its innovative approaches to integration and healing. Representatives from various magical communities came to study their methods, and several other sanctuaries had been established based on their model. But for Lin, the true measure of their success wasn't found in official recognition or institutional acclaim. It was found in moments like the evening when he stood in the castle's music room, leading a choir of voices that represented a dozen different species in a song of his own composition. The melody spoke of journeys through darkness, of finding light in unexpected places, of families formed through choice rather than chance. As the voices rose and fell in perfect harmony, Lin felt a peace that he had never imagined possible in the darkest days of his exile. "Beautiful," Kassian said softly, appearing in the doorway as the song came to its conclusion. "Both the music and the sentiment behind it." "It's our story," Lin replied, moving to stand beside the man who had saved him in every way that mattered. "All of our stories, really. Broken things finding new wholeness, lost souls discovering new purposes. "And what purpose have you discovered?" Kassian asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "To show others that rejection isn't the end of the story," Lin said simply. "That sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually needed."
No regrets.
Kassian asked the question that had become their evening ritual. "None," Lin replied, reaching up to kiss the man who had become his anchor in every storm. "Only gratitude for every choice that led us here."
Papa Lin. Papa Kassian.
Mika's voice called from the corridor outside, now 13 and growing into the confident young man they had always known he could become. "The little ones are asking for another story before bed." "Duty calls," Lin said with a laugh, but there was no reluctance in his voice. This was the life he had chosen, the family he had built, the purpose he had discovered in the ashes of his old existence. As they made their way to the children's wing of the castle, where a dozen young faces waited eagerly for their nightly story, Lin reflected on the journey that had brought him from a broken Omega bleeding in the dirt to the confident leader of a thriving community. He had learned that true strength wasn't about never falling down, but about getting back up and choosing to help others do the same. That real love wasn't something that happened to you, but something you actively chose and continuously nurtured. That the most beautiful families were often the most unconventional ones, built by beings who understood the value of acceptance because they had experienced the pain of rejection. Most importantly, he had discovered that destiny wasn't a fixed path laid out by cosmic forces, but a series of choices made by individuals brave enough to define their own worth and create their own happiness. "Once upon a time," he began, settling into the comfortable chair where he had told countless stories over the years, "there was a young wolf who thought his life was over when his song was rejected by those who should have treasured it." The children listened with rapt attention as he wove a tale of music and magic, of loss and redemption, of families formed through choice rather than blood. And when the story was finished and the children had been tucked into their beds, Lin and Kassian walked hand in hand through the castle that had become their sanctuary, their home, their proof that love could indeed conquer any obstacle. Outside, the eternal twilight of Raven's Hollow painted the gardens in shades of silver and shadow. Inside, the house rang with the quiet sounds of a family at peace, laughter from the common rooms, gentle music from the practice halls, the soft conversations of people who had found their place in the world. "Thank you," Lin said as they reached their private quarters, the words carrying the weight of years of gratitude. "For what?" Kassian asked, though his ancient eyes were warm with understanding. "For seeing worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. For giving me time to heal. For helping me build something beautiful out of our shared solitude. For loving me enough to let me choose you freely rather than demanding my surrender." "Thank you," Kassian replied, "for choosing me, for trusting me with your broken heart and letting me help piece it back together. For showing me that immortality doesn't have to be lonely. For proving that love can indeed transform the darkest places into sanctuaries of light." As they stood together in the window of their tower room, looking out over the domain they had built through patience and love, Lin began to hum softly. The melody was new, composed in that moment, speaking of contentment and hope and the quiet joy of coming home. Kassian listened with the appreciation of someone who had learned to treasure such moments, knowing that they were built on foundations of choice rather than obligation, love rather than necessity. This was the family they had created, the legacy they were building, the proof that sometimes the most beautiful songs could only emerge from hearts that had been broken and then carefully, lovingly, put back together. In the distance, a clock tower chimed midnight, marking the end of another day in their unconventional paradise. But for Lin and Kassian, it felt more like the beginning of something eternal, a love story that would echo through the corridors of Raven's Hollow for generations to come, inspiring others to believe that they too could choose their own destinies and create their own happiness. They had learned that fate was not something imposed upon you, but something you created through the accumulation of daily choices. And they had chosen each other, again and again, in moments both grand and small, building a love that was stronger than any bond imposed by cosmic forces because it was freely given and continuously renewed. As Lin's humming grew into soft song, filling their chamber with melodies of love and hope, Kassian knew that this was what happiness looked like, not a destination reached, but a journey shared, not perfection achieved, but growth embraced, not fate accepted, but choice celebrated. And in the castle of Raven's Hollow, where twilight reigned eternal and love conquered all obstacles, their song would continue for as long as hearts could choose to beat in harmony. But their story was far from over. As the years passed and the House of Peace grew into a recognized institution, new challenges arose that would test the strength of everything they had built together. The first sign of change came on Mika's 16th birthday, when his mixed heritage began to manifest in ways none of them had anticipated. The boy who had once been silent and withdrawn had grown into a confident young man with an intuitive understanding of magic that surpassed even Lin's considerable abilities. "Papa Lin," Mika said one morning as they worked together in the castle's expanded library, "I've been having dreams again, but these are different from the nightmares I used to have." Lin looked up from the ancient text he was translating, noting the mixture of excitement and concern in his adopted son's voice. "Different how?" "They're not about the past," Mika explained, setting down the book he had been organizing. "They're about the future. I see things that haven't happened yet, people I've never met, places that don't exist. And they all seem connected to something important that's coming." The revelation that Mika had developed prophetic abilities was both thrilling and concerning. Such gifts were rare even among pure-blooded magical families, and in someone of mixed heritage, they could be particularly powerful and difficult to control. "Have you told Kassian about these dreams?" Lin asked, reaching out to place a comforting hand on Mika's shoulder. "Not yet," Mika admitted. "I wanted to talk to you first. You understand what it's like to have abilities that set you apart from others." "I do," Lin said softly, remembering his own struggles with gifts that had once seemed more like curses. "But I also know that having people who love and support you makes all the difference. We'll figure this out together, all of us." That evening, as they gathered in Kassian's study to discuss Mika's developing abilities, the vampire's ancient wisdom proved invaluable in understanding what they were dealing with. "Prophetic gifts often emerge during times of significant change," Kassian explained, consulting one of his oldest grimoires. "The fact that Mika is experiencing them now suggests that something important is indeed approaching." "Something that affects all of us?" Lin asked, instinctively moving closer to his partner as if seeking comfort from his solid presence. "Most likely," Kassian confirmed. "Prophetic dreams are rarely about random events. They tend to focus on situations that will have significant impact on the dreamer or those close to them." "What kind of impact?" Mika asked, his young face serious with concern. "That remains to be seen," Kassian replied gently. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this, son." The use of the word son was deliberate and meaningful. Over the years, Kassian had gradually evolved from reluctant guardian to devoted father, and Mika had responded by flourishing under the vampire's patient guidance and genuine affection. The answer to Mika's prophetic dreams came 3 months later, in the form of an unexpected visitor who arrived at Raven's Hollow during the darkest hour of the night. Lin was awakened by the sound of the castle's magical defenses activating, their warning bells chiming with unusual urgency. "Someone's at the gates," Kassian said, already moving toward the window to assess the situation. "Someone with significant magical power." They dressed quickly and made their way to the castle's main entrance, where they found a figure standing in the courtyard with an aura of authority that was both familiar and strange. As the stranger stepped into the light cast by the magical torches, Lin gasped in recognition. It was an Omega werewolf, but unlike any he had ever seen. The visitor was tall and powerfully built, with features that spoke of noble bloodlines and eyes that held depths of knowledge that seemed almost ancient. His hair was pure white despite his apparent youth, and when he moved, shadows seemed to follow him like living things. "I am Kirin Nightsong," the stranger said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with magical power. "I seek the one called Lin, who has built a sanctuary for the rejected and the lost." "I am Lin," Lin replied, stepping forward despite Kassian's protective instincts urging him to remain behind the vampire's formidable defenses. "What brings you to our home?" "Prophecy," Kirin said simply. Dreams and visions that have been growing stronger with each passing night. I have been sent by powers older than our current conflicts to warn you of what is coming. What kind of warning? Kassian asked, his ancient senses detecting something about their visitor that set him on edge. The old barriers are failing, Kirin explained, his strange eyes fixed on Lin with uncomfortable intensity. The magical boundaries that have separated our world from others for millennia are beginning to weaken. And when they fall completely, beings will emerge that make our current troubles seem like children's games. And what does this have to do with us? Lin asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. You have built something unique here, Kirin said, gesturing to encompass the castle and its inhabitants. A place where different species can coexist peacefully, where outcasts can find new purposes, where love transcends traditional boundaries. Such a place will become either a beacon of hope or a target for destruction when the chaos begins. Chaos. Mika's voice came from the doorway, where he had appeared despite their instructions to remain in his room. That's what I've been seeing in my dreams. Creatures of shadow and flame, magic running wild, the old laws breaking down. Kirin turned his attention to the young man, and something shifted in his expression. You have the sight, he observed with approval. Your dreams have been true visions of what is to come. How long do we have? Kassian asked, his strategic mind already working on the implications of what they were hearing. Months, perhaps a year at most, Kirin replied. The signs are accelerating. Reality storms in the eastern provinces, creatures emerging from places that should be empty, magic behaving in ways that defy all known laws. And you want us to do what, exactly? Lin asked. Abandon everything we've built here and run? The opposite, Kirin said with a slight smile that transformed his austere features. I want you to prepare for war. Not the crude conflicts between pack and clan that have occupied us for centuries, but a battle for the very nature of reality itself. The weeks that followed Kirin's arrival were filled with intense preparation and planning. The mysterious Omega proved to be a font of knowledge about magical theory and prophetic interpretation, helping them understand the scope of what they were facing. The barriers between dimensions have been maintained by a network of ancient artifacts, Kirin explained during one of their strategy sessions. These artifacts have been failing one by one, and when the last of them breaks, the floodgates will open. Floodgates to what? Lin asked, studying the maps and diagrams that Kirin had spread across the table in Kassian's study. To realms where different rules apply, Kirin said grimly. Places where magic is raw and wild, where creatures exist that were never meant to walk in our world. Some of these beings will be merely dangerous. Others will be actively malevolent, seeking to reshape our reality according to their own alien desires. And you believe our little sanctuary can make a difference in such a conflict? Kassian asked skeptically. I believe that what you have created here is the key to survival, Kirin corrected. You've proven that cooperation between different species is possible, that outcasts can become powerful when they're given proper support. Those lessons will be crucial when traditional alliances fail and old prejudices become luxuries we can't afford. As they delved deeper into preparation for the coming crisis, Lin found himself spending more and more time with Kirin, learning from the Omega's vast knowledge of magical theory and prophetic arts. The white-haired stranger was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, with insights that helped Lin push his own abilities to new heights. But it was during one of their private study sessions that Lin made a discovery that changed everything he thought he knew about their mysterious visitor. Your song, Lin said suddenly, interrupting Kirin's explanation of dimensional theory. I've heard it before, in my dreams, but that's impossible, because I've never met you until now. Kirin went very still, his strange eyes fixed on Lin with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. What exactly did you hear in your dreams? A melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, Lin replied, his voice growing stronger as the memory became clearer. A song that spoke of loss and exile, of power constrained by fear, of choices that could reshape the world. Lin, Kassian said quietly, noting the tension that had suddenly filled the room. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Lin said slowly, never taking his eyes off Kieran, that our visitor isn't just here to warn us about the coming crisis. He's here because he's part of it. Kieran sighed deeply, and for the first time since his arrival, his composed mask slipped slightly. You have more insight than I gave you credit for, he admitted. Yes, I am more than just a messenger. What are you, then? Lin asked, though part of him was beginning to suspect the answer. I am what you could have become, Kieran said simply. An Omega who was rejected not once, but many times, who wandered between worlds seeking a place to belong, gathering power and knowledge but never finding peace. You're like us, Mika said with sudden understanding. An exile, an outcast. I am what happens when someone like you doesn't find someone like him, Kieran said, nodding toward Kassian. When rejection becomes a pattern instead of a single traumatic event. When power grows in isolation instead of love. The revelation cast their entire relationship with Kieran in a new light. He wasn't just warning them about the coming crisis, he was showing them what Lin might have become if circumstances had been different. And now, Lin asked, what do you want from us now? To learn, Kieran said with surprising humility. To understand how you built something beautiful out of rejection and trauma. To see if there's still hope for someone who has wandered too long in the darkness between worlds. There's always hope, Lin said firmly, echoing words that Kassian had spoken to him years earlier. But it requires choosing connection over isolation, love over power, trust over self-protection. Easier said than done when you've been burned by hope too many times, Kieran replied with a bitter smile. Then start small, Kassian suggested, his ancient wisdom recognizing the pattern of someone who had been hurt too deeply to trust easily. Stay here, help us prepare for what's coming. Let us show you what family looks like when it's built on choice rather than obligation. Over the following months, as the signs of dimensional instability grew stronger and more frequent, Kieran gradually became part of their extended family. His vast knowledge and magical abilities proved invaluable in preparing the House of Peace for the challenges ahead. But more importantly, his presence helped Lin understand how fortunate he had been to find healing and love. He's like looking into a dark mirror, Lin confessed to Kassian one evening as they watched Kieran working with some of the castle's younger residents. I can see exactly what I might have become if you hadn't found me when you did. And I can see what you might still become if we're not careful, Kassian replied, his voice carrying concern that went beyond the immediate crisis. Power without connection. Knowledge without love, strength without purpose. That won't happen, Lin said with conviction. I have too much to lose now, too many people depending on me. And I have you to keep me grounded. Always, Kassian promised, pulling Lin close in an embrace that had become as natural as breathing over the years. Whatever comes, we face it together. The first major test of their preparations came on a night when the very air seemed to crackle with unstable magic. Lin was awakened by Mika's terrified screaming, the young man caught in the grip of a prophetic vision so intense that his mixed heritage was manifesting uncontrollably. They found him in his room, surrounded by swirling shadows and flickering lights. His eyes rolled back in his head as he spoke in languages that predated recorded history. Kieran was already there, using his own considerable power to create a protective barrier around the convulsing young man. What's happening to him? Lin demanded, reaching out instinctively to comfort his adopted son. Don't touch him, Kieran warned sharply. He's caught between dimensions right now. Physical contact could pull you in with him. Then how do we help him? Kassian asked, his vampiric senses detecting magical currents that were far beyond normal experience. We anchor him, Lin said with sudden understanding, his own prophetic abilities resonating with what he was witnessing. We give him something to hold onto, something that connects him to this reality. Without waiting for permission or approval, Lin began to sing. Not words, but pure melody. A song that spoke of home and safety and unconditional love. His voice rose and fell with harmonies that seemed to reach across dimensional barriers, calling to the lost soul of his son. Gradually, Mika's convulsions began to subside, his breathing becoming more regular as Lin's song provided an anchor point in the chaos of his vision. When his eyes finally opened, They were filled with terror and knowledge that no 16-year-old should possess. "I saw it," he whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "The first breach is going to happen soon during the new moon, and it's going to happen here." "Here," Kassian repeated, his strategic mind immediately shifting to defensive planning. "Why here?" "Because of what we've built," Mika explained, struggling to sit up despite his exhaustion. "The love, the acceptance, the bonds between different species. It's created a kind of magical resonance that makes the barriers thinner around us. So our greatest strength is also our greatest vulnerability," Kieran observed with grim understanding. "The very thing that makes this place special also makes it a target." "Then we'd better make sure we're ready," Lin said with determination that surprised even him. "If we're going to be the first battleground in this war, then we're going to make it count." The preparations that followed were intense and comprehensive. Kassian used his connections in the vampire world to gather allies and resources, calling in favors that had been accumulating for centuries. Lin reached out to the growing network of sanctuaries that had been inspired by their example, asking for whatever assistance they could provide. Most importantly, they began training their residents in combat techniques that combined traditional fighting skills with magical abilities. The children and adolescents who had come to them seeking refuge were taught to defend not just themselves, but the family they had found. "This isn't what we intended when we opened our doors," Lin said one evening as they watched their former outcasts drilling in the castle's courtyard. "We wanted to create a place of peace, not a military camp." "Peace is not the absence of conflict," Kieran observed, his own experiences having taught him hard lessons about the nature of survival. "It's the presence of justice, of protection for those who cannot protect themselves. Sometimes you have to fight to preserve the things worth having." "Is that what you've been doing all these years?" Lin asked. "Fighting to preserve something worth having?" "No," Kieran admitted with rare honesty. "I've been fighting to prove that I'm strong enough to survive alone. But watching you, seeing what you've built here, I'm beginning to understand the difference." The dimensional breach came exactly when Mika had predicted, tearing open reality like a wound in the fabric of space itself. It began as a small distortion in the castle's main courtyard, no larger than a man's fist, but within minutes it had expanded into a swirling vortex that seemed to contain impossible depths. From that vortex emerged creatures that defied description, beings of shadow and flame and twisted geometries that hurt to look at directly. Some moved with predatory grace, clearly hunting for prey. Others seemed more interested in the magical energies that suffused the castle, feeding on power like vampires fed on blood. "Positions," Kassian commanded, his centuries of military experience taking control as the battle began. "Protect the children first, then establish a perimeter around the breach." The fight that followed was unlike anything any of them had experienced. Their enemies didn't follow the rules of normal combat, appearing and disappearing at will, attacking from directions that shouldn't have existed. Traditional weapons were largely useless, forcing them to rely on magical abilities and quick thinking. Lin found himself at the center of the battle, his voice weaving protective barriers and offensive strikes in equal measure. His songs had evolved far beyond simple healing melodies, becoming weapons of devastating beauty that could shatter dimensional barriers and banish creatures back to their home realms. Kassian fought with the controlled fury of someone protecting his family, his vampiric abilities enhanced by centuries of tactical knowledge. He moved like liquid shadow, striking at weak points and coordinating the defense with the precision of a master strategist. Mika, despite his youth and relative inexperience, proved to be their secret weapon. His prophetic abilities allowed him to anticipate attacks before they came, giving crucial warnings that saved lives and turned the tide of individual skirmishes. But it was Kieran who made the decisive difference. Drawing on power that Lin was only beginning to understand, the white-haired Omega stepped directly into the dimensional breach, using his own body as a conduit to redirect the chaotic energies back upon themselves. "What are you doing?" Lin shouted over the sound of reality tearing itself apart. "What I should have done centuries ago," Kieran replied, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated across multiple dimensions. "Choosing connection over isolation, sacrifice over self-preservation. The explosion that followed as the dimensional breach collapsed was both visual and spiritual, sending shockwaves through the castle that left everyone temporarily stunned. When the light faded and the dust settled, Kieran was gone, and the vortex that had brought so much destruction had sealed itself completely. "Is he dead?" Mika asked, his young voice heavy with grief for someone who had become like an uncle to him. "Not dead," Lin said with certainty that came from his prophetic abilities. "Changed. He's become part of the barrier between worlds, helping to maintain the separation that keeps us safe." "Will we see him again?" Kassian asked, noting the profound sadness in his partner's eyes. "Someday," Lin replied, "when the barriers are strong enough to hold without his sacrifice, when the immediate crisis has passed. He'll find his way back to us, because now he knows what family means." In the aftermath of the dimensional incursion, the House of Peace became more than just a sanctuary for outcasts. It became a symbol of resistance against the chaos that threatened to consume their world, proof that love and cooperation could triumph over even the most alien forms of destruction. Delegations arrived from across the supernatural world, seeking to learn from their success and establish similar defenses in their own territories. Lin found himself thrust into a role he had never sought, that of a leader and teacher, helping others understand how to build the kinds of bonds that could withstand dimensional warfare. "You've become exactly what Kieran predicted," Kassian observed one evening as they stood together on their favorite balcony, watching the sun set over their expanded domain, a beacon of hope in dark times. "We've become that," Lin corrected, taking his partner's hand in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "All of us together. I couldn't have done any of this alone." "And you'll never have to," Kassian promised. "Whatever challenges lie ahead, whatever new crises emerge, we face them as a family." "Speaking of family," Mika said, appearing in the doorway with a shy smile on his face, "I have something to tell you both." "What is it, son?" Lin asked, noting the mixture of excitement and nervousness in the young man's expression. "I've been having new dreams," Mika said. "Not about disasters or invasions this time. About the future we're building. About the children who will grow up here. About the love that will continue to grow and spread." "And," Kassian prompted gently. "And I saw something wonderful," Mika continued, his smile growing brighter. "I saw myself, years from now, teaching my own children about the family that took me in when I had nowhere else to go. About the two fathers who showed me that love comes in many forms, but it's always based on choice and commitment." "Your own children?" Lin repeated, his heart swelling with pride and joy. "You've found someone special?" "Maybe," Mika admitted with the bashfulness of young love. "There's someone at the Academy of Integrated Magic who makes me feel like I belong somewhere even when we're apart. Someone who doesn't care about my mixed heritage or my strange abilities." "Then bring them home," Kassian said immediately. "Anyone who makes you happy is welcome in our family." "Always," Lin agreed, pulling both his partner and their son into a group embrace that spoke of bonds stronger than blood or fate. That's what family means, choosing to love and support each other, no matter what challenges we face. As they stood together on the balcony of Raven's Hollow, watching the stars emerge in the twilight sky, Lin reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a broken Omega bleeding in the dirt to the leader of a movement that was reshaping the supernatural world, he had learned that the most important magic wasn't found in songs or spells, but in the courage to keep choosing love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. The future would bring new challenges, new crises, new opportunities to grow and learn and love. But whatever came, they would face it together, as a family bound not by destiny or duty, but by the conscious daily choice to see the best in each other and build something beautiful from their shared commitment. And in the castle of Raven's Hollow, where twilight reigned eternal and love conquered all obstacles, their song of chosen family and redemptive love would continue to echo through the ages, inspiring others to believe that they too could overcome any rejection, heal from any wound, and create their own destiny through the simple but revolutionary act of choosing to love and be loved in return.